in the San Geronimo Valley, San Geronimo, California. And we were just talking about how funny it is. Like, yeah, like I feel like I know you, even though this is our first time meeting.
Yeah,
just
for sure.
Familiar faces in the V, you know?
Yeah, if you grow up out in San Geronimo Valley, then there's always a connection.
Yeah.
It got a community feel, and it always will. I think people that know it. So
totally. I never realized, like, what's the population out here, like 4,000 or something like that?
Can't be much.
That always sounded like a big number to me until I went out into the world, and then everyone's like, "Oh,
you're like Fairfax got 15,000."
Yeah, exactly.
Not that I know that's what it is, but
yeah, something like that. But beautiful day. We got the bees buzzing. We got the flowers blooming. And today we're here talking about this book that you just wrote and are in the process of publishing. And maybe we can just start by, I'm kind of interested, like, what's the process been like for you in, identifying this story and then, making the decision to write a book about it?
I would say it kind of started in 2006 when I first read my grandpa's autobiography and became aware of what, my grandpa and his family went through when Hitler took over Austria, where they lived, and had to flee. So I read it then after he passed away, and the story had a big effect on me. I remember feeling like I wanted to kind of create something else too from that. And, a lot of time went by, and then 2020, I reread it when we all had a bunch of time on our hands, and it just kind of really sunk in that I wanted to put together a document, basically, a book, that detailed all of the stuff that I could find out about my grandpa's uncle. His name was Paul Patek, and he's responsible for, me having a life, when it comes down to it. And, it became very clear and really started to sink in the second time I read my grandpa's autobiography, just how much he meant to the family and what he did and, the type of person he was. It just kind of was shining through in my grandpa's writing and the way he would, talk about him. And, it's really interesting because my grandpa and I were never close in his lifetime. We never communicated much, but he wrote his entire life down. So I feel like I've really gotten to know him and, his uncle, who the book's about. That was the main, it was more than a real passion. It was like an urgency, honestly. It was like, oh, this needs to be compiled so that our family really, puts a spotlight on it for ourselves, who Paul Patek was to us, because, I don't want to talk bad about my family and whatnot, but the story was a little bit kind of just sitting to the side of the situation and, not, in my opinion, honored in the sense that it should be, because, it's a weird thing to realize that events that took place and decisions that somebody made that I'm not actually related to bloodline wise, like his sister's my grandma or my great grandma. But, I exist because of
his
him.
Actions.
Yeah. Like things that he decided to do, like him not wanting to go in traditional form of education, become a doctor, a lawyer type thing. He wanted to work with metal and started to become, an expert in that, got a degree right before World War I, and then went into World War I, and probably having his engineering degree helped him because he ends up being in charge of a searchlight division, and he's, mostly in the rear of the action, I would assume, me being in charge of a searchlight.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that helped him in World War I, and he survived it without any, physical or mental, issues that the family wrote about, at least. And then after the war, becomes a real expert metal worker in a train factory. And basically that little window in time where he learned how to be an expert drop forge engineer led to, when Hitler came in 1938, he had the knowledge and the expertise to apply for a job that he saw an ad in some Jewish newspaper that this guy in Japan, his name was Carl Rosenberg, had put in looking for a drop forge engineer it was a Swiss firm or factory. It was a Japanese factory, but a Swiss firm or something. But so they put an ad looking for a drop forge engineer, and Paul saw it April 1st. Hitler invaded Austria on March 12th, 1938. So not too long after, within a few weeks, he gets shown this ad and applies for the job. All these cables go back and forth. That's definitely one of the most interesting parts of the story is when I was communicating with somebody that had written a book. This German guy had written a book about some German guy that was in Japan, and he saw that there was a 52-page file on Paul Patek in these records that were originally compiled in Jerusalem, and then the DC, the Holocaust Museum in DC, microfiched it and made it much more readily available. So
you had all these primary sources to were you able to access those files?
Yeah, I got them like by the end of that day, I think. I remember it being really fast. I was in like some Facebook forum and asking questions, and this guy popped in saying that he, was writing, he wrote a book and he was researching it, and he saw Paul Patek's name written in one of the documents that he had, and he actually showed it to me. And then he said, yeah, there's a 52-page file. It's called the Paul Patek file, and it's sitting in Jerusalem, and you can ask him for it. And then I asked him, I didn't know it was in DC at that point, but then I kind of was looking around, and the internet, you can find all these holes, and all of a sudden you click on a button, and I asked for it and said who I was, said the file number, and the Holocaust Museum was great. They sent it to me right away.
I'm curious. I kind of want to take you back to the kind of moment of discovery, because I think, as you were saying, right, you're reading this autobiography of your grandfather, but that you noticed that this story wasn't maybe being told, in the way that you wanted to be told. Like, what was that process like? Like, how did you discover this story, or how did that first come into your onto your radar?
I mean, in 2006, and when I read my grandpa's autobiography, it's in there. The story is in there. Paul's life is told because, he saves my grandpa's life. He's his uncle. He does all of these neat, fun things before he goes to World War I, and he gives nice gifts at Christmas time to the kids. So it's just like there's this real love for his uncle that you can see in the pages. And then they both, my grandpa and his brother's name was Kurt, my grandpa's name was Rudy. So they both wrote like an essay strictly about Paul that in 2020, when I reread it and I got much more into it and was trying to find more, my mom handed me a box of my grandpa's writing, which was massive, honestly. He traveled all over the world, so he wrote about all of his travels, but he had written he'd written an essay, and then he got his brother to write one, basically strong-armed him into it. You can tell by the way his brother starts it.
Nice.
But, it's just both of the brothers knew that their uncle, through his skills and his expertise and, also winning the lottery literally right before he left Austria and getting a way to cash the winnings and have them held in Austria. And that's the money that paid for my grandpa and his brother to leave in, January of 1939. They would finally leave Europe. And then Paul's sister, my great grandma, and their parents, Leopold and Irma, leave, I don't know, 3 or 4 months after my grandpa and his brother left. And they all get to Japan safely without visas, apparently. And my grandpa ends up going to Peking, now Beijing, and going to a medical school and getting his degree. He was 4 exams away from getting his degree in Vienna when Hitler said, "No more for you." And he had to flee. And
we should say your family's Jewish, right? Through
historically, my paternal line is pretty thoroughly Jewish, and but I'm definitely not religious in any way. But I have a lot of respect for different religions and people that are. And
It's part of your heritage.
yeah, it's weird. It feels more like a long lost people of some sorts that because I feel like if I was talking about long lineages of Christian people, it would just be like, oh yeah, that's my family. But
Right.
when it gets to the Jewish situation, there's a different weight to it, and I feel like it definitely started to sink in a certain sense, because I know a lot of the key details that family members went through when Hitler went in there, and
well, it's historically significant too. I mean, if you didn't have that part of the story, it'd be like, well, why did these people have to flee to Japan?
They wouldn't have fled.
Why your grandpa's about to finish his exams? Like, why interrupt that?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why it's called An Ordinary Man, because obviously Paul wasn't. He was quite extraordinary by the definition of extraordinary, but I feel like he would much rather have lived a pretty ordinary life, and been a fun-loving, happy-go-lucky guy. He was gay, and he was openly gay in 1920s Austria, which is in 30s. That's
dangerous.
Yeah, that's not what you are going to do if you can avoid it. So I don't know. I mean, it started to really dawn on me that this person was probably one of the most fascinating people to ever walk the face of the earth. And I exist because of stuff he did. He has no descendants, other than these kind of offshoots. And I feel like it started to make me think about it more and more. Like, there's so many people out there that you're constantly looking, who's your grandpa, your mother, you're going back like that line. But there's these, like I'm an uncle, and I know that I'm having a big influence on my niece and nephew, and I know that I can be a certain person that can help them out, but most likely probably never going to have kids. So I'm living a very similar life that he did, and I feel like I don't know. There's uncles and aunts tend to stick out, I think, when you're a kid.
Totally.
and whatnot. Like it's really easy to feel close to your family, but I feel like a good aunt or uncle kind of has a different place.
It's an important role because there's, I think, as an uncle myself, I don't have kids, you're able to provide a level of guidance without, because you don't have the weight of parenthood on your shoulders. There's a nuance that can be created. There's space for a certain level of nuance in how you are influencing the next generation.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot of
more fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of freedom that I'm sure can look quite annoying to the ones that have kids. It's
that's kind of part of it, It's like,
I mean, hey, I'm not going
gotta
to
pay your
apologize
siblings
for being
back
able to
for
go
all
home
the-
and get a full night's sleep.
Totally. Yeah, and I think, one of the points that you hit on, when I think about, this character of Paul and this idea of like descendancy, in a way, this story is, you are a descendant through the web of causality of his actions.
Yeah.
Right? He's tied to you, not via, biologically, yes, but not direct lineage, but his actions have created this reality that you're able to live in. And
Yeah, like literally, the fact that I can even create this book is because of him. It's just it's a really weird position to kind of find yourself in. I feel like I don't know. I don't talk to a lot of different Jewish families about how they talk about their history, in particular if it has anything to do with what happened in the Holocaust. But I know that most people didn't talk about it much, and rightfully so. In particular, people that went to the to like Japan and China and were in Shanghai, they didn't write about it right after the war and for decades, because the stuff that was coming out of Europe was what it was, and so it took precedent, and it was I don't know. I mean, it is a strange feeling. Like I don't really understand why I felt so compelled to get his life story out there other than like, I could kind of hear him, being like, hey, you do this. It's going to take a lot of time. And like I could hear these jokes, like,
Yeah.
oh, you're going to spend a bunch of money, and, and do this and that. But it was, it felt really special. Like, honestly, 2020 was the best year of my life in a lot of ways, like, getting married was a wonderful thing and all these things. But it was a very, it's like I think back to sports occasions where I thought it was so great and the feeling of it, but it was just something very organic about it and the way it built. It was like I'd find one thing and it would just kind of spark my interest more to find more. And then, my little sister one day was like, just hire a writer, because I was constantly talking about trying to figure out a way for us to write it within the family or something. And then, so then I found this business that helped me find a ghostwriter. And, a lot of the questions she asked me really opened up a lot of interesting things that are in the book and, stuff that I would not have found without her, so it was a real perfect situation. And it just, took a while to do, but I feel like it felt fast, like it felt like about a few months, each kind of section of it, the like discovery. And then the like, it was about maybe 10 months that would happen, but it felt like, it was just really fast because it was, I don't know. It was weird. It was like discovering who I was and never knew who I was, and like why?
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Is like, why a book? Especially what you shared with me about your relationship with reading, growing up, and stuff.
Yeah,
If that informed your decision at all, and making this story into a book rather than another.
Yeah, I was never a big reader. Reading was very difficult for me growing up. And I would say that's been one of the nicest blessings about this process is that I am a better reader of it because of it. And, I read a lot of real heavy books in terms of immigration policy and German policy, Nazi policy, I should say. And then the other part of my family is German, like my grandparents met in Peking. My grandma was, her mother was Jewish, but her father was German and had, pretty good connections within Germany. And she could have stayed in Europe, Switzerland if she wanted to, but, 17 years old, wanted out of Europe, jumps on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, like right before Germany attacked Russia and gets to Peking. So, I come from, my paternal line is a very Austrian Jewish family mixed with a very kind of proud and German, also Jewish because my great grandfather was married to a Jewish woman. And, that's why he had to leave the diplomatic service in Germany in like 1931 or something he left. So, yeah, it was, and it's something that I know that I'm going to keep discovering stuff. Like I'm going to Austria in June, so
Nice.
in like a month or so, and I'm sure that I'm going to see all kinds of things that are going to make me feel certain things that, I might wanted to have added to the book. And I actually purposely tried to not add how I felt about things and this and that, because it would have been pretty easy to, but I kind of want the reader to just read. It's a very dry book, in terms of its telling. Because I feel like if you're telling something historically accurate, comedy has its place.
Yeah.
But you got to be really careful with it in that realm.
My experience, it reads more as a chronicle than a commentary.
Yeah, it reads like something that's ready to be built out more, in terms of the characters being fleshed out and all these things.
Podcast.
Yep.
All right. I'll try not to interrupt.
So, anyways, 2020 was fun. Like, I kind of felt weird during that time, just being like, this is just the best time ever. Because, and I feel like there's a lot of people that felt that. Like, if you really took that opportunity to use that time to do whatever you wanted to do, you became better at it after it. And there's a lot of a lot of solitude, like I like solitude. I grew up out here in this space where, I spent a lot of time doing my own thing. So,
Well, it was a lot of
was
solitude and
comfortable.
a lot of space. This whole podcast came out of the pandemic, and videography. It gave us all space to finally look at the things that we were putting off, or try to build something new. And
Yeah.
it's been really cool, despite all the obvious negatives of that period of time, just to see the wealth of creativity that was wrung out of people.
Yeah, I remember when it was happening, feeling like, oh, you can just feel the creative juices coming out. And I felt like there was going to be this explosion of great music. And I can't say that there was or wasn't. I don't know if I have the pulse on it enough to say.
Yeah.
But, I don't think it was the 60s or 70s music-wise or anything. But, I think there's just so much content out there. It's hard to really know what's
Sure.
out there.
Yeah.
So. But, it was... I don't know.
I'm curious.
I get chills when I think about 2020. Like from the time that I reread my grandpa's autobiography up until basically the end of that year is when I was like, I'm hiring a writer and this is going to go. I don't care. A few family members pitched in because it was a chunk of money to do it.
Sure.
But it just felt really relevant for our family. But honestly, the book is really for anyone that likes family or like survival stories, or, just reading about what people went through during those times. There's a lot of people that, they read that material pretty exclusively. And it's just, it's definitely a missing piece of what happened to Jewish people that went to Japan. 'Cause there were some that made it all the way to Japan. There was quite a few that made it to Shanghai because it was the only place in the world that basically just said, no visa needed, just come on down. And, Tsujihara, the Japanese diplomat, was writing a bunch of visas for people that they ended up in China or in Japan and then China, and some directly to Shanghai. So it's a really interesting history. And it's weird, like talking about a family and that went through, World War II and saying it's a feel-good story, but it is. Like, it really is a feel-good story. And I feel like he couldn't write a book about, this guy Paul Patek without it coming off as a feel-good story, just from the little factual things that he did. Like, I wish that I would have some of his direct writing and input to be able to put in there in some way. And I know that there was a lot because he wrote a letter every Thursday to his sister and then to his nephew after she passed away. So there was 30 some odd years of Thursday letters coming from Austria to Oakland. And
did you find any of those?
No,
or those were lost in the sands of time?
I just saw them being mentioned by both.
Gotcha.
Both my grandpa and his brother. They mentioned every
Were you
Thursday.
able to find any of his words or writing?
Yeah, I did. I found a letter that he sent to, I'm not going to say the word in German because I don't know it, but in English it translates as the Property Transactions Office.
Okay.
And it was an office that the Nazis set up to rob people of their stuff, basically.
Legitimize their theft.
Yeah. Say you're not deserving of your stuff. I can't really figure out a way to say why they did it, but so he sent a letter the day that he left and told them a few things that they should do with money that he had out there, because he had a business that he had started, a lock business, and did quite well. So he had customers that owed him money. So he was following his letter of the law rule that he had to take care of his elders and saying, hey, go collect my accounts payable, Nazis. Fuck.
I remember that from part of it. The story, didn't he he patented a new type of lock or something that?
Yeah, he patented some like springless safety lock or something. That's how my grandpa wrote it.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's just some little part that he patented, but he was competing with like Yale locks there was no companies trying to compete with him really at the time. So he would travel all around Austria and go to small towns and sell the lock. And he had like a business before that selling all kinds of random things. And, he was just he was a true Renaissance man. I mean, he made this rug that's behind me.
Nice.
And made many, many more. And he, could play the cello, could play the piano. He loved to cook. He was a dog man. I'm going to say he was an animal man because I'm sure he would have liked cats too. But he just, I don't know, like, I'm pretty quick to say I love you to people if I love them.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say it to you within an hour if something happens.
Yeah.
And some shit goes down and
easy to express that.
Yeah, it's like if I feel it, I'm gonna say it. And I it just the more I got to know him, I just was like, it's weird. Like I fell in love with somebody that died 10 months after I was born. Never met, never heard anything about. And that's weird because I feel like I have memories of like my grandpa saying things like, "Oh, Paul, this," because I'm sure he was top of his mind for most of his life. Not only just because he was a good uncle, but when the Nazis came to town, he got the family out.
It's really interesting, this idea. You're like you're falling in love with with an echo. Shadow, right?
No, it really fit like there was no, I'm not going to get a response that I'm going to be able to hear, but I could just feel that he was, all of like everybody that came before him, honestly, is happy that this is out there because I talk about him and I talk about his parents and then, going back as far as I can go. And, those are the parts of the book that you're basically reading somebody else's genealogy. But I don't know, for me, I wanted it in there because it's like, you're reading about a family, and families are kind of a little pedantic and boring and trudging along, and things happen here and there, and this person does that, and you hear about it for a minute, and it goes away, and that's reality, and that's what everybody that was in Austria at the time was going along with their life. It's just. I think it's 2.2% of the population was Jewish in Austria, but that small percentage was the main priority of the invading forces. And when the Germans came in, the Austrians, for the most part, embraced it. Went along with it, and there was definitely a lot that didn't. And there's quite a few people that my family mentions that are in the, I put them in the book. And, so for me, it's like all of these different people that are just kind of like, you would kind of leave them out of a biography about somebody if you had a lot more information on them and you could maybe interview them, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's like Paul was a family man. You know what I mean? Like, he had very, very few regrets in his life, but I think one of the only ones was that he never got to create his own family. And I think that was more just that he was going to live the life that he felt empowered to, and that was to be a creative, mischievous gay guy. And, and when the chips were down, he knew what to do. Like he was that guy, that where it's like, if something's going wrong, you want him on your side because he might not be the strongest, the fastest, smartest, but he's going to keep you uplifted and he's going to see the opportunities as they're coming and capitalize on them and be polite through it all. And not, what I mean? It's like you think about just getting through life doing random things. It can be a little jarring. Just go to the grocery store and, go visit the doctor or whatever. And it's like, I just think about the fact that from March 12th, 1938 to he leaves August 3rd, 1938, like between then and the time he leaves, it's just, we're going to take everything that you own. And if you can't figure out a way to get out of here, we're going to kill you. Mm-hmm. And if they had known for sure that he was gay, I'm sure they would have scooped him up right away.
Right, he's got a double threat.
Yeah, and I feel like he, he just didn't let it get him down. And I feel like it kind of rubbed off on the rest of the family in a certain sense. And it's pretty tragic. There's one family member that refuses Paul's help because of, I'm going to say it, because of Paul's sexuality, and he just couldn't come to terms with it. And he ends up staying behind. And you can read the book and figure out how he ends up going, but he doesn't make it to Japan. And but Paul offered him the help.
Yeah.
Paul forgave. I don't think that he was never really mad at him. I think he was just probably heartbroken because Paul was really close with his family and his sister, and they were the only two siblings in the family, and they were tight. I'm sure he was. She writes about him as unfailing, which is basically like, gluttonous or immoderate, like someone that's just going to do whatever they want, almost.
Libertine.
Yeah, just keep doing it type thing. Yeah. So he, and I don't know. I just like, you read a lot about humor during the Holocaust and how important it was, like, and how important it is, basically to get through anything in life, but particular that time. And the Jewish people have a long connection with humor, and and I feel like it's same thing with Black people and the history of slavery. I mean, it's just like,
it's one of, I think it's one of the great coping mechanisms.
When you're down, you need a joke. Sometimes you can't absorb it, but you still need it. And it's like when you got those people around that they can kind of keep that vibe light, like it goes a long way. And it's like, it's not measurable. Like, how can I measure the effect that Paul Patek had on the rest of the family? But I can see it in the deeds that he did, and what it must have taken for him to plan it that way and to always be there for the family. Like he just, I can't find anything about him that I don't like.
It makes me think of, like, I have this kind of concept or theory. You think about these different moments in history, where there's conflict or chaos or upheaval. And, growing up, I'm of Jewish heritage as well. And I have had family, great cousins. My grandma's cousins died in the gas ovens, and you hear so many stories of these heroic escapes and the many, like, left turns, the zigs that, had they been zags, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about, we think about these, nice, dude, movement of Ja people. And I should put mine on silent as well. But it makes me think about, during these big moments, I guess growing up in the States too, and thinking about something like the Holocaust, one of the obvious questions is, like, could it happen here? Could authoritarianism take hold? What would I do? I've played that, that fantasy out in my mind a bunch of times, even going back to being a kid. And I think if you look at the stories, millions of stories woven through these huge events, there's these characters that emerge that are people that were able to kind of dance through the experience with grace, even in the darkest of times, and maintain a level of optimism and humor and really grace through it all, where you're like, man, this person lived through the heaviest of experiences, but their life is not a tragedy. They were able to maintain, or not maintain, but they were able to still live a life that was, that's attractive from the outside. And it sounds like, this guy was one of those people.
It's weird because I don't think I would sign up to live through World War I or be a Jewish person in Central Europe during World War II. But I'd be honored to live the life that Paul Patek did. And
right.
Tell you that. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, like the fact that I feel like I'm so inspired to talk about him, and that he really would have just disappeared into time in a lot of sense. And it started to make me realize more and more, like, there's just all these gems of stories that, obviously a lot of them are gone because they can't be told or whatever, but I feel like they're detectable, like through research in certain senses. And it takes the individual family member starting to look, because they're the ones with the authority to do it. And, I don't want to say passion, because it's more like it's like a weird kind of drive, like I feel like a passion is more like for a hobby that, you can put down at some point. But, it's something that it changed my life for sure. And I know that the more I put into it, the more it has the ability to change my perspective of who I am. And, when you read the book, it honestly makes you question all kinds of things, like about, yourself and your own dynamics with your family and, greed and certain things. It's like, it's a real kind of basic telling of probably one of the most amazing stories to happen. And, at some point I would like to get, some really good writer that really understands the time and how to convey emotion to where it's respectful and wrap it into the modern sense that obviously there are a ton of parallels.
Yeah.
It kind of starts to freak me out to make them because I actually understand quite well the methods that Hitler used to get what he got. And I'm not going to point my fingers at anyone, but it's effective.
Oh yeah.
And, so it's, but, I'm not a writer, honestly. It's like,
what would you call, how would you,
I do like writing though.
how would you
discovered
define,
that.
yeah. How would you define though, your role in the creation of this book, of this document? Like, you're getting an author credit, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did write probably 15% of it. The first draft that was done with the ghostwriter, her name's Carrie Galertner. She was great. It's much more of a family document. It's got a lot more like dates and addresses and things like that. So that, if somebody wants to look into it in the future, it's all right there. And then this one, it's had some feedback on it and some changes here and there and some information that I took out and some that I added, some that I found after, the first round was published. So what was the question?
I was just curious, like this, when you say that you wrote like 15% of it, but I think maybe that's the difference between when you think about like the term writer versus like an author. Like it's more of like, it wasn't just like putting pen to paper, but you produced this book, right? There was a director or producer role that I'm just trying to get to like, the way
it felt
that you
like
think about your role in creating this document.
No, it felt like a real kind of team effort. My wife, who's much better at grammar and sentence structure and things like that, definitely helped me a lot. And, Story Terrace, the company that I hired to write the book. So I had a lot of help, and, a lot of my family, I could tell were, grateful and excited that I was so into it. And I wanted to kind of like find out as much as I can, basically. And, so, I mean, that's kind of how the process was for me, that I felt like I was, like it wasn't going to happen unless I was going to push it along. But, I know my lane a little bit. I tend to swerve out of it occasionally, but I really do like the writing process. Something that I've kind of noticed about myself my whole life is that I really do like just sitting there writing about something. The creative sentences that kind of come in and out of your head.
Yeah.
And then the editing process, I notice I like that too. But it's definitely not my my strong suit. I would not have been picked as the kid to write a book at old Lagunitas school down there.
It's great though. I mean, that's an amazing. You see that reflected time and again, these moments where people are able to take something that they've struggled with and use that as the thing that they then create from, and I'm curious, you're a woodworker, right? Or I don't know your specific title in that regard.
I have a hardwood floor business.
You have a hardwood floor business. You're working with wood. I'm curious, in creating this book, if any of those skills translated or if there were lessons that you've learned.
Yeah,
in your
just sticking to it. Like construction in particular, no day is ever the way you imagine it going usually. Sometimes it's way better. Sometimes it's slightly what you thought, but it's, I mean, I like what I do, but I feel like I'm always kind of 1 foot into something else. I've always been that way. Like I got into photography and then gave that up. And, I'm into beekeeping now, and I'm thinking about how that's just kind of fun, but more of a responsibility than I had thought about in a lot of ways. But I don't know. It was weird because I knew I had to put something together about Paul. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to get out of my head. Like I was definitely a little off the deep end string theory type person for a few months when this was all, because I was just finding information and it would just blow my mind. I had to call my cousins and tell them this and that. And finally I started to be like, I want them to actually read this, so I'm going to stop calling them. And then it just all started building up in my head more and more. My poor wife was like, I love Paul. Paul seems great, born one day before her, all these things. She loved him, but, she'd heard enough of it. And, and I got to a certain point where, the voices of these ancestors kind of quieted down, and we're like, okay, this can go out now, and you can kind of keep pushing it. You just need to, it's weird because I'm telling somebody's life that has no opinion, no say in what I do with it. And it's an amazing story that has the ability to go far and be made into a big movie. And it's probably, the book feels like a first step to me, in terms of the published one. If the other one feels quite finished in terms of the factual information that I can record for the family in the future. But there's just a lot of details about this man that I'm sure are sitting out there in different ways,
When you were going through this process of collating all the information and putting it together into a narrative, were there certain family members that stepped up and kind of pointed you in different directions, or influenced the direction that this story took?
I mean, not really in like direction wise, but I could definitely feel the excitement more from certain ones than others, which would make me feel validated, I guess. But it was weird. Like I felt like I was almost like slightly yelling at my my dad and his uncles, and like, why didn't you guys make this like a national holiday in our family? Like we need to light candles and honor this guy every, but it's just, it's like my family's close, but like most families, certain things don't get talked about. And, this was one of them.
Did your dad have a similar, like, what was your dad? I'm curious, your grandpa, you've discovered, that this guy was such a big part of your grandpa's world. I'm curious, like, was that a story that your dad was told when he was little?
Yeah, they were all told it. They all knew. But they didn't know certain details that I'd found and that my grandpa had written. And then also that file that was, accumulated, because it was basically a cable in Harbin that was communicating with people in Japan and Europe for getting jobs, mostly Jewish people, I assume. And so it's just these stack of historical cables. I mean, I'd be really curious to read all the other ones,
Yeah.
because there was just a lot of people passing through there. And there's people actually mentioned in the file about Paul that, like they're considering these other people for the position that Paul got hired. And I got really curious about like what happened to this guy. There was some, I forget his name right now, but he's some guy in worked in some factory in Dusseldorf and was like in Holland, and I'm sure was, wanting to get out, because I think Holland they weren't occupied at that point, but I'm sure if you were getting any information out of Germany, then you knew that better to leave.
Right.
So, like stuff like that, and that's a lot of the stuff I'm actually the most excited about publishing this book, is that there are clues out there that people might read it and say, that's my family. Like, that's my grandpa, and like, I'm really curious where they ended up, because I just became really curious where all these people ended up, like there's these really interesting dovetail parts of the book. I don't really want to spoil it, but it's real kind of touching detail. The fact that Paul Patek, at the end of his life, is taken care of by a man named Franz Baumer. And Franz Baumer was my grandpa's best friend in medical school, and he was a member of the SS in Austria before it was even legal to be a member of the SS in Austria. It was actually illegal up until Anschluss. And so he, basically in that time period, in the months of Anschluss, kind of realizes the errors of his ways, and I don't want to say like repents or anything, because I feel like he really transformed as a person, like in those months. And he ends up being the primary caretaker of Paul Patek at the end of his life.
Wow.
So it's like, here's this former SS member who's taking care of this gay Jewish man who means so much to his best friend growing up. Like that connection. The reason that he said, I will take care of Paul when Paul can't take care of himself, is because of his connection to my grandpa.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty big 180 right there.
Yeah. And it's like that right there. I feel like there's a book just in that, honestly, like just those two characters.
Totally.
And,
or an Oscar grab movie,
Yeah. But it's like, that's fiction. That would become fiction,
Totally,
because all I have are, everything that I know about Paul is in that book. I'm sure I'll find out more, but what's available to find that I found in the last 2 years or 3 years is in there. So
I wanted just to ask you what you would think about, because we've like touched on a couple elements of the story, kind of like painted almost an echo maybe of what this guy, Paul Patek, was. Do you think it would be valuable just to give like a very basic summary of the story for people that are curious about what this book is or what it's about? I feel like maybe I should have done that in the beginning with you, but maybe this would be a good time to just kind of like...
I mean, I love unorthodox situations.
Yeah,
so
it's kind of how podcasts are,
Yeah.
But I think maybe it would be valuable.
We'll do
how would
the
you
synopsis
summarize?
at the end.
Yeah, exactly. If you made it this far, now we can give you the goods.
Yeah, now we can spoil the book for you, but hopefully still buy it. It's coming out.
Well,
coming out May 25th.
You don't have to give it all away, but maybe, it's like the coffee table conversation. You're like, oh, I wrote a book. Someone's like, oh, what's it about? Like, how would you summarize?
I mean, I love just telling people everything.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for the last few years, and I'm realizing I should probably not. But I mean, it's really a story about a family with this extremely talented, quite eccentric character who was obviously a man of his word and a man of his own being. He was going to do what he wanted to in life. And so just that is interesting. But, it's like when he goes off to World War I, he goes to a store in Vienna and buys a monkey, puts it in a big old cage, and gives it to his mom. when he parts to World War I because he figures he may not survive and this little creature is going to replace him. And so it's like, that little detail kind of really sums up for me who he was growing up with the family, because when you read about the rest of the family, no one comes off as very funny. They're all rather serious in their own way. But he just stands out as this, multi-talented person. He loved to write. He loved to play music, cook. He was that guy. He was the guy that you want to hang out with and you want to ask your important questions to in life because, he's going to listen and he's going to give you good advice, So it's like, for me, that's how I kind of picture him all the way up until his formative, I guess his World War I was rather formative. But after that, I feel like when he works in the factory and then, goes off on his own and makes his own business, it's like that just really tells this like expansion part of his life. This like, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to love who I'm going to love. And I'm going to try to, compete with this big lock company and, and then it all gets smashed to pieces. Yet again, World War I smashed his whole trajectory of his career really into pieces in a lot of ways. And then World War II basically completely rips apart the life that him and his family had built for years. The family moves there and to Austria in like, I think 1860 something ish. So 80 some odd years. The family's been working and, kids going to school and this and that. And then when it all gets smashed to pieces and he basically sees this golden coin flipping around in the air as a job in Japan, says, I'll take that. Mm-hmm. And not only does he say, like, I'm going to take that, like he actually has he wrote books on metalwork and wrote articles. So he had the ability to put in an application that they considered and accepted. So, that's, the story is basically a super fascinating person that probably would have rather have been just cooking with his family and friends and running his business. He would have been a fun person to be around, but he would have just been this average person. But all these things that he ends up having to, grapple with, and then not only that he saves himself, he manages to bring 5 people with him, and a passage from Trieste to Shanghai and then on to Japan is not cheap, I imagine. Mm-hmm. And then it was, I'm sure.
And he wins the lottery. Like
that's what paid for it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think about that a lot. Like it just seems there's so many parts about the story that do not seem feasible. Like if you were writing it as fiction, you'd be like, well, it's too corny at this point. Like, but
stranger than fiction.
Yeah, and it started to make me think, hey, maybe Paul had a bunch of money and just had it in the bank and was like, I'm going to make up this story about the lottery because everyone will get all excited and then they'll like accept my help. They won't be like, oh, we don't want to take your money out. But it's probably not what happened because, the Nazis were pretty thorough with robbing you of everything. Mm-hmm. So I think that he got these winnings and got them into, his boyfriend Karl von Hossinger's hands. And as an Aryan man, he could walk in and take him and put him in a bank under his name. And Paul could still communicate with Karl and say, hey, purchase 2 tickets from Trieste to Shanghai, and then from Shanghai to Japan. I will meet them at the docks in Yokohama.
Wow. And
basically just shows up at the docks and says, give me my family. Much more politely, I assume. Yeah. But so it's kind of a weird book to try to make a synopsis from because there's just all these little parts of it. And it doesn't, being a true story, it's not clean, it's not like, oh, it's as clean as it can really be, but everything in life is quite messy. So, it's not like he comes back to Austria and, him and Karl get together and have a great love affair and, open a cafe and it's the best gay, none of that happens, his life just plays out the way it, did, and the way most lives do.
Totally.
And that was one of the things that really started to sink on me, with that all of our lives they're really special, but they're also super just mundane. Like, you really feel it when you're going through life. Like, if you can be happy doing the mundane things, then that's a successful life, I feel like. Like, I feel like as soon as I get myself a little down, I feel the weight of things, it's like, nothing seems worth it anymore. And I feel like that was Paul's biggest gift. Out of all the gifts he had, his biggest gift was like the ability to, hypothetically throw the entire family on his back and say, we're gonna go, and we're gonna have a good time while we do it too. Because he's just all these little super kind details that he does that really show the way that he felt about the situation, the family, what things called for. And it's just I really wish I could have met him. I mean, he would be speaking German, I'd be speaking English, so it wouldn't.
Did he speak English as well, though?
No, I don't think he ever learned English too well.
Okay. But it sounds like, through his actions, also like the clearest refutation of the stereotypes about someone like that at that time in the world. The things that people were saying about Jews and homosexuals, like, this guy is like a living proof of how bullshit all that.
Yeah, it's just people.
It's like a direct contradict.
Yeah, it's just people trying to figure out what they want for dinner and how they're going to make some money to pay certain bills, and
how they're going to get a monkey for their mom.
Yeah, how they're going to make
war.
their mom smile before they go off to war. And it's really people that were born in the 1890s, late 1880s, mid 19, they lived through, if they were in Europe and they lived through it all, like, it's the world we live in is so affected by that, like World War II is affected by World War I, and World War II is still alive today. Like, it's just right there under the surface,
It's interesting. I've been kind of obsessed. It's funny that we're talking about this story today, because lately I've become pretty obsessed with this period of time. Like, I'd say growing up, I've always been really fascinated by like the medieval era, and, of course, like the Wild West. Like, there's these moments that are told often through film or through fiction.
Yeah.
But lately, like that, like late 1800s, early 1900s period of the Industrial Revolution, I just keep finding myself drawn to these stories that take place in this context. And the more that I think about it, we're 100 years removed now from that period.
Yeah.
In a very similar, parallel situation as we're looking at the way that technology is accelerating,
No, it's
with the AI, with the social, the huge social upheaval with social media and the internet. And, as someone who, we both grew up or came of age in the 90s, we're kind of living in a similar hinge point culturally that this story takes place in, albeit 100 years later. So I think there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn.
Yeah, there really are. I mean, it's kind of frightening, honestly, when you think about what followed from 1920 to 1940.
Yep.
And 45. It's
what are the 2040s going to look like?
I don't think that I don't think we can afford another fight like that as a species.
Yep.
I just don't. The toys we have now, I shouldn't say toys, but the
stakes have never been higher.
Yeah, and it's just like, and I don't think that they fully grasped that when they started barreling into World War II, and I don't think the Nazis really cared. But most modern people know that the weaponry we have now is, tearing up our streets physically and has the ability to do way worse.
Just wish our leaders would figure that part out.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like an easy problem, just get along. I feel like Paul Patek probably could have come up with some good anecdotes to make us get along a little bit better, but I don't know. There's a real internal desire in human beings to defend what is yours, and what that means is mercurial, and you can harness a lot of power when people are scared.
Yeah.
And, you don't think straight, and so it's just, but yeah, I mean, it's, like Vienna at the turn of the century, 1900 was a place to be,
happening spot, right?
Like you're talking some of the biggest, explosions in art and science and, you name it, it's happening in Vienna and in Berlin, which is, crazy to wrap your mind around the fact that the most liberal place in Europe apparently was Berlin going into World War II. So, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's a part of the, I don't really get into it because it's a can of worms that's meant more for an open conversation.
Sure.
Than like, this is how I feel about what's happening now and why I think these parallels are going to spin us in the wrong direction. It's like, but there's things that I feel like in our lifetime, like we never would have imagined happen, like what happened in Charlottesville is just like, really? A year from now, we're going to have people marching around in a university with torches saying, basically echoing 1930 something Germany. It's, banning books. They were banning books. They were creating, laws that you couldn't make fun of Hitler and, talk bad about Nazism and get thrown in jail for it. And it's like, I don't feel like our country could get to that. I feel like, the ability to speak your mind is quite powerful, but so are angry people with weapons. So I don't know.
We gotta. I think the lesson that I'm hearing through it all is to despite the way the winds are blowing and the the kind of bigger picture stories that are manifest in this time that we live in, we all gotta kind of emulate this Paul Patel character.
Paul Patek.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Paul Patek character. And thanks for correcting me.
No worries.
It's
not like he's a household name.
Yeah. This Paul Patek
Patel is, though.
Yeah. This Paul Patek character and, find our own way to dance with grace.
Yeah.
Through the times. And, and I think, one of the big takeaways from this story is the importance of community and family and, doing, putting in the effort in our own small ways to create that sense of community and family, to reinforce it, to support those people, because when the larger pattern gets so tumultuous and chaotic, it's like really all we have power over is, our local community and our connections with our family. And that's what we need to be,
And it's a lot easier said than done to be your best self. There's I can't imagine Paul doing anything that he come across as like anything other than maybe slightly funny and annoying as he's doing it. But I know that I've been a bad, grumpy person at points in my life. But yeah, like, I feel like Paul could teach us a lot about how to get along and how to enjoy an evening, things like that, Like sometimes it's hard just to get through the day because you don't have anything to do. And then sometimes it's hard to get through the day because you got too much to do. And then sometimes you don't know what to do because you're confused. And it's like, I look at him and I'm just like, man, it seems like he just was like, okay, this is what needs to get done. So we're going to take the dog on a walk, and then we're going to go home. We're going to make dinner, and then we're going to make my rug for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do a little writing. I know he was doing writing. My grandpa writes about how he used to like to write short stories and all these things. So I'm holding out hope that there's a stack of German short stories over in Austria somewhere for me to find.
Yeah.
But, we shall see about that.
Sweet, man. Well, dude, thanks for coming on the show. And before we get out of here, this book coming out soon. So
May 25th,
May 25th.
which would have been Paul Patek's 130th birthday.
Okay. Nice. How can people find it? How can people
You can find it on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. If you just put in An Ordinary Man Bock, B-O-C-K, it'll come up to the top. If you put in An Ordinary Man, there's a bunch of other Ordinary Man books and whatnot that
ordinary
take precedent at this point. But the book's called An Ordinary Man from Vienna to Japan and Back During World War II. So if you put that whole title in, it'll come up. But An Ordinary Man with just Bock, B-O-C-K, will bring it to the top. And you can pre-order the hardcover and the ebook at this point. The paperback's going to get pushed out like right a little bit before or around May 25th. So
and I'll put the
weeks.
link. I'll put the links in the show notes as well, so people can access that. And if people want to connect with you, is there a space?
There's
for
an
that?
email address in the book.
Okay.
You can send me your thoughts.
Okay.
I just threw an email on. I only want people to send it if they're like, I really want to write something. I didn't want to be like, write something to me, but it's there. There's an email address that I'd like to get, because I'm really curious what emotions it brings up in people, because it's impossible to read about stuff that people went through that's this horrible and not have something come up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of opportunity for you to, grapple with your own life by reading about this other person's life. And, I really like reading nonfiction stuff. I've read very few fiction books in my life.
Well, I can give you some recs because I'm a big fiction guy. So.
Yeah. The one that I did just read that I will highly recommend is called The Book Thief.
The Book Thief.
Yeah. The guy's Marcus Zukes, I want to say, is the author. But that's a really good book. And, of course, it's about World War II. And
right on.
But it's really good.
Nice.
It's so.
Cool, man. Well, dude, thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hell yeah. Everyone go check out An Ordinary Man.
Please do.
And until next time, peace.
Yep.